Okay, let's continue the seminar. The first presenter in the afternoon is Tuomo Raunio from Finance Academy, Uniarts Helsinki, and you are a media artist as a background, and now you're working as a lecturer in Finance Academy. And what is the title, exact title for your?
In Art and Technology.
Art and Technology. So, welcome.
Thank you.
So, I've prepared a slightly more formal lecture, so I hope you can bear with me through the lecture. First, I would like to thank Theatre Academy and the Department of Light and Sound Design for the invitation and the organizers to make this event possible. I'm also especially pleased to be here as someone who represents visual arts, and hopefully through this perspective I can bring some cross-disciplinary viewpoints on the discussion of the interactivity. Yeah, my title today is the interactive image, the visual arts and the technologies of the invisible. Thinking beyond the static representations, images play now double role by being representational and functional. With the post-digital era, we have witnessed a massive rise of visual information, but also a rise of visual interfaces. I will concentrate on questions like what is the role of image in the current technological condition, and how does the challenging role of visuality has been reflected on contemporary art. The presentation will raise some questions about the concept of functional image and its implications, the visual art in general. It will be also bring up some questions related to the interface and more, which is a profound element in the contemporary digital media. My presentation will be following a rereading of Laura Mark's notion of unfolding aesthetics and rethink its validity in the post-internet era. American theorist Laura Marx published 2010 a comprehensive study of relation between contemporary media art and the Islamic art. In her book Enfoldment and Infinity, published by MIT Press, Marx conceptually is linking two fairly distant and separate domains. And we'll find quite some surprising remarks. I will not necessarily go into details to explain how Marx bridges these thematics, but rather concentrate on the rereading of her notion on media art and try to shift these concepts to analyze the post-internet art of today. I would like to approach the broad theme of interactivity from the perspective of unfolding. Instead of thinking interactivity as a relation between the viewer and the interface, I would like to focus on the experience of the interaction and the constant process of unfolding. So first I will quickly dive into Marx's notion of the unfolding and then later bring some examples to follow. Marx lays out a three-level model for understanding aesthetics of unfolding. First level covers what is perceptible, and that's something that Marx generally names as an image. And the second level is hidden from perception, but is still not immaterial in itself. And this level is the level of information. And third level is the infinity, where which is completely inaccessible. which is still like the ground where both information and image are grounded and from where they are unfolding. Marx also explicitly shows how she adapts this notion of unfolding from Gilles Deleuze, but she adds a Deleuzian theory of science yet another plane, and that is the plane of information that completes the model. For Marx, the concept of interface is essential as it connects the levels together. Thus, the information, it acts as a mediator between different realms. And I quote, image is an interface to information, and information is an interface to infinity, end of quote. It's also crucial for the analysis of the art in general. Paraphrasing the notion on Marx's notion, one could say that the image, rather than being a window to the world, is a window to the legible information. And that is the underlying code behind the digital realm. In addition to the three levels, there is yet another dimension of the model. All the three levels are both virtual and actual. These concepts, also adapted from Gilles Deleuze, who has developed them further in his theory of the time image. I think in the aesthetics of unfolding, Marx's profound notion is that the visible is always, what is perceptible is always in relation to what is invisible, and interestingly, not immaterial. The visible image, in any sense modality, is unfolded from the invisible information and further. With these concepts in mind, I would like to approach some of the examples. In an early, well-known web net art work, Olia Lialina uses a tree-structured storytelling where the story is revealed in creative use of hyperlinks and frames. The viewer is moving through a narration that unfolds differently with every step. Already here, it becomes evident that the concept of this kind and this structure is challenging the control over the work. So, rather than looking at the representation, the viewer experiences a presentation, unique, ever-changing, and somewhat uncontrollable. So everything I'm showing here is online, so you will anyway have the access to this. Another example, something completely different, is a web-based conceptual work by John F. Simon. The work, Every Icon, is an attempt to draw all the possible images in a 32 by 32 grid, using only black and white pixels. Algorithmic image does not make difference between signal and noise. The paradox here is the fact that the amount of images in this setup is already close to infinity, what comes to the human scale of computing time. It took 1.7 years to go through the first line, and it takes 5.8 billion years to iterate through the second line. But even though the time scale for iterating through all the possible variation is multiple times longer than the time of the age of the universe, it's still finite. Moreover, infinity plays a crucial role only in the interpretation of the image and in understanding the abstract structure that defines it. What seems to be also relevant in this paradox is that when non-figurative image appears representational through an arithmetic logic, sorry, the canon of image making developed in this context of iconoclasm offers a new and a fresh point to the reinterpretation of the context of the digital aesthetics. And another consequence from approaching the plane of information is that all the bitmap images have something in common structure that establish relationship between them. The images, the identity of the image is a multiple and without a center. It is not the similar images that relate, it's not only that the similar images relate to each other, but all the possible images do. Images that did not earlier, before digitalization, have anything in common are now relatives and originate in the same mathematical foundation. Every image is an opening to the specific fold in this map of images, and now we actually can actually open multiple folds and see the relation between them. Earlier this year, pushing the idea of every icon a little bit further, there's also a more human-oriented approach to similar situation. Earlier this year, PseudoScript site organized a collective for 72-hour painting event on the social media aggregation site Reddit. The key idea was to have a canvas that everyone could share and use, and all the users could add 1 pixels in every 5 to 10 minutes. This meant that the drawing actually would require, drawing anything specific would require a large number of participants. From a single blank canvas and with simple rules, this was the result. You can see the development and the planning that the different groups were organized, and in an earlier state, you can see that first figurative character appearing, and then different battles between the corners that were taken over by colors, like blue corner, and then later on artworks appearing, flags and all the national kinds of national symbols, and of course the void created in the middle. Yes, and the final canvas. There's also another characteristic notion of the contemporary visual culture, and that is the interfacial image. In the past 20 years or so, the way of thinking about images has changed. Images and interfaces merge, bringing up a new situation where image does not only represent something, but is also functional in relation to what it represents. American philosopher Benjamin Bratton talks about the shift of the interfacial image. I quote, "Images now the thing that images now do the thing that they represent," and continues. "Images are now functional in a way that we haven't seen before." Earlier, end of quote. Earlier, we did have maps and diagrams that definitely led way towards graphical user interfaces of today. The notion that underlines change is the fact that we now have a technology that operates through semantics of image. Not all computers require graphical user interfaces, but the ones that have become dominant. And we are now facing interfacial images on our daily basis. The merging of the graphical interface and the image create new visuality and also extends to visual arts. One of the early post-internet works by Petra Cartwright makes it based on a simple idea where artist is scrolling through a web camera filters, when at the same time the camera records her deadpan face. The work shows an anti-hype of the internet technology and the evident boredom of the person facing the interface that so expediently was designed for fun and to play with. The interface is also a key figure in a brilliant work, Cross Fatigue, by French artist Camille Endreau. In a 15-minute film, the 15-minute film is composed of a large collection of video clips that present a layer and that are presented, layered, and overlapping. The editing shows a constant opening and closing of files, making it perfect metaphor for Marx's notion of unfolding and folding aesthetics, where Marx states, the new window, quote, the new image is a window not out to the perceptible, but to the legible. The constant opening and closing of different access points to information seems to reflect also the contemporary experience of the internet, and especially the way the knowledge is unorganized through experience. Image material in combination with powerful soundtrack recitated by a spoken word artist creates a kind of combined mythology of Genesis. The action between images and image and text is essentially to broaden the view of the world towards a non-lingual argumentation. The world of contemporary science and the world of different belief systems are all present, parallel without conflicts between them. I would also like to analyze some of the works in the earlier this year when Kiesma started their online collection, Ars Plus 17+, and it's kind of interesting to find that most of the commissioned works are based on the idea of interface. In the electronic music duo Pink Twins created their work explicitly on the idea of interface, where it's a kind of a mixing tool where the viewer or the user can make his own mixtape of the Pink Twins studio recordings. Being somewhat different from the online, from the offline work from the same artist, the work is almost completely lacking the rich visuals that is so characteristic for the Pink Twins works before. Instead, we can just see an minimalistic website which the user can control for 4 different audio channels. And taking a step out of the visual arts, might consider the work almost an iconoclastic, as it gives responsibility to the user. The online work seems almost like a tool rather than an artwork. And another work from the same collection is Jarkko Räsänen, whose work Okay, maybe I can't show it, but Jarkko Räsänen made a work that is basically a tool to filter images sent by the user. So the user can upload the image, and the program gives 6 variations. And after choosing the image, then the user can add it to the gallery side of the work. And I find them. It's here. Even though both examples challenge the idea of artwork, one might still look after more experimental use of the interactive works. What seems to be clearly common in interest is the replacement of the artwork with something that is not only looked at, but something that is used. There's also a challenging example of the interface and work by Swedish artist Eunice Lund, who worked extensively with website interfaces. In his work, This Click in Time, the viewer is confronted with a black screen. After a while, user also might feel restless and start clicking different spots on the page. And this is actually what the artist hoped for, since all the mouse clicks are recorded and played back on the site. Just kind of a history of that blank website being used in some sense. In another work, Lund has also created a playful interface for art market, where viewer can browse through a large canvas and crop out the most appealing parts to be then framed and delivered. Also, before moving forward, I still want to share another technology of interaction by German conceptual artist Bartel, who was commissioned for the Landart Kunstverein Springhornhof, and who realized a project where he converted stone into an Wi-Fi hotspot, where the fire was made next to the stone. The heat was converted into electricity, which eventually turned on a Wi-Fi router. The user can then access the local network and download a survival guide in PDF form. The work play with in concretely of different technologies and kind of beautifully bridges something very ancient and contemporary. As a fire itself being some kind of a metaphor for gathering and a social interaction, in this case the user is not connected to internet, but something that is left behind. And this notion maybe adds some kind of a sense of dystopian idea to the work. And then I want to also ask, what if interfaces are not something that artists create, but also that's something that already exists and can be accessed to? And what if the interaction is no longer mutual choice but a condition? When one finding oneself surrounded by interfaces with access to information, one might also start to think if the access is only one direction. In many cases, it isn't the case, quite the opposite. And I think this mass surveillance and data collection and tracking has become quite a big trend on among the artist activists. In Hita Sterl's work, How Not to Be Seen, she borrows a structure from instructional video. Despite of a tongue-in-cheek strategy, the work raises a serious question about surveillance and military technologies. The idea of the world as an image is based on the constantly developing satellite image technologies. In the video, we see a calibration targets, huge constructions consisting of dashes and lines that are used for testing the resolution of aerial or satellite imaging. The automated male narrator commentates, quote, "Resolution measures the world as an image. The most important things want to remain invisible. Love is invisible, war is invisible, capital is invisible," end of quote. And instructional lessons give 5 steps how to become invisible. Make something invisible for camera, be visible in plain sight, become invisible by becoming a picture, be invisible by disappearing, and become invisible by merging into world made of pictures. Another artist dealing more explicitly on surveillance, Adam Harvey. He's especially exploring societal impacts on network data analysis and focusing on computer vision, imaging technologies, and counter surveillance. In his ongoing project, he has developed a camouflage technique to hide from the computer vision systems. In his project, CV Dazzle, computer vision Dazzle, explores the fashion that can be used as a camouflage from face detection technologies. And the project followed is an it's a project Hyperface where the artist is developing and canvas structures supposed to prevent face tracking, kind of as a false target of artificial data that seems like a face for the system. So it's not only the human having an interface and using it, but also the computer vision being a user and the artist creating the interface for it. And one of the examples is also about this flipped interface is an older work, Surveillance Chess by activist artist group Media Group Bitnik, and a document video pre-Olympics where the artist group hijacked London security cameras and replaced the camera image with the computer chessboard. Also, and a work by Trevor Backlund and computer security research activist Jakob Appelbaum collaborated on a work Autonomic Cube, where the artist created an access point and a Wi-Fi hotspot in a museum space where the viewers can access the internet autonomously and through the routed Tor network. And still one more example of the artist Heather Dewey Hagberg, who realized 2012 and 13 a project which takes the question of privacy and identity yet another level. The artist collected various fragments of cigarettes and hairs, chewing gum from the street, and in the laboratory extracted the DNA sequence out of them. From that sequence and the data analysis of the DNA, she then created the 3D models out of the imagined figures. The process opens a dreadful vision of the possibilities of the biological surveillance. It also very clearly shows how the understanding of the enfolding and unfolding aesthetics and the relation of image and information is crucial in the contemporary art practices. It's also an interaction, and also that the interaction may take place in an unpredictable context. And these interfaces are still yet to be developed. So if an image is an interface to information, what does this access allow us to do? Thinking the access point to information also means that opening the interpretation to another direction from information to perceptible image. This is something we see quite often used in an experimental process adapted in visual arts. An artist duo Semiconductor produced photographic images transformed in the field with the field recordings from the same, like a sound field recordings from the same spot, where the sound was then used to manipulate the image. And this it's kind of a translation between the recorded material, the sound, and the image. It still opens up a kind of a idea of the image as an interface, and I still want to show another example from the same artist. In another work, in Brilliant Noise, the video data is translated into sound, and the example could be very multiple, as this is quite common. But I would like to point out the kind of the fact that there is this underlying structure of binary code that makes it possible to transfer different materials with each other. This structure, what Marx could call information, is the material level of the digital. As the Brilliant Noise alludes, and I guess it's worth mentioning, there isn't any magical correlation between the different phenomenal translations, sound, image, or text. It all requires work, and the work done in the interpretation. And another way to put it is that the interpretation equals to discovering filters, no matter how complex. Thus, it's important to bring up the important notion of Marx when he states, quote, "Art privileges disruption of the signal or the difficulty of extracting signal from noise," end of quote. Earlier mentioned work by John F. Simon might have seemed trivial, but as the technologies advance and the argument does seem less trivial day by day. In a very recently, very recently, different algorithms and neural network computation has taken some steps forward. And a recent research paper published 2 months ago, Finnish research group at NVIDIA published a cutting-edge survey on the computer-generated realistic images. So if we can now think about the John F. Simon 32 by 32 image grid, and we can actually have an access point to that world of images through the images that were already known. Because in this method used in a research, it's based on an unsupervised machine learning system called generative adversarial networks, where the neural network generates images and the other evaluates them. One of the key ideas behind this paper is the progressive growth of the resolution, which makes the computation more stable. And this example shows a possible future of the image making, where the images truly become interfaces, in a sense that this algorithm was fed with 30,000 images, data set from Hollywood actors, and from that data set it could generate more similar kind of facial images. And I will finish with an example by Turkish artist Memo Akten, who's been working with some of the deep neural network technologies in the context of visual arts. For the ongoing project Learning to See, Akten used different images from 150 art collections and trained the neural network with them. On the video, we can see both two video feeds, one that is from the web camera, and the one that is processed through what the algorithm has learned from the art collection. So you can watch this video online, and when the artist starts to draw on the paper, we can see the processed image appearing and completing the drawing. And Atkin describes himself the method, quote, a pre-trained deep neural network making predictions on a live camera input, trying to make sense what it sees in the context it has, in the context of what it's seen before. It can only know what it see what it already knows. So sorry, it can only see what it already knows. So what I find inspiring here is the way that the image itself is turning into an interface and an access point to other images. And I would like to finish with this notion of interactivity as something as a human-machine relation. As Marx states, quote, images are interfaces to information, end of quote. And the task of extracting signal from noise is the work for the interface. Here is what the artist should start discussion on the definition of signal and noise to be able to renew the aesthetics for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah, I hope I'm in time. So.
questions you have?
Yes, good. Good.
Discussion. It's a compact package of a lot of interesting examples. Personally, I was intrigued by the dimension of this interface and how the interface itself can be some kind of artwork or contain this kind of artistic content, or within its mechanism of well, it depends how do you see it? If it's a relationship of relationship, or if there is a collaboration, like there was this evidently this example of where was this black hole in the middle, and people were bringing 1 pixel by person there. That was some kind of a collaborative. It needed some kind of a collaboration and coordination in a way, made collectively, which was interesting. But also that what is collaboration, what is interaction, what is conversation, like within those, and there were barriers.
Yes.
But this, it was intriguing me really.
Yes, and some kind of I try to emphasize on some kind of a shift in there, where the artwork itself is somehow being used for some other purpose that is not as that it just creates like a reference frame for that interaction, and it's still it's kind of it has a double role. It still could be considered as an image or as something that to be looked at, but at the same time it opens only through that interaction.
And also, I think it was interesting the division between the image and the information, because that is also like it can be then transferred or transposed also into different dimensions, because it's quite near of the critiques of the post-humanist discourse, in the sense that post-humanist discourse is like dividing the information like from the knowledge, which is all the linguistic level, and stating that the information is kind of it's like independent from the knowledge, and thus like abducted from a human domain.
And there seems to be some kind of link in this morning's discussion about the performance also, like thinking about it, there was discussion about how the somehow the audience performer relationship can form the art piece and make this kind of own rules. Well, it was more like about the play and playfulness, but the same kind of a playfulness is there actually in some of the interaction in some of those examples. That's the piece of work is between the actual materiality of the what is presented, but also the what is the receiver, or how is the one who is interacting is forming the relationship and the work together.
Yes, in some sense, I think that there is that maybe in that collective painting that was like more evident, because it had such a loose rules and that was what was just a starting point, so that the game could come involved from those principles, and in some of the maybe it's kind of very I didn't really have those examples in now to show, but it's maybe a part of the kind of post-internet aesthetics where work or a method is like taken over and repeated in another context, and then that it becomes more of a play, kind of some kind of translation after translation from that from single work to multiple. And
I think it's also quite interesting to think about the idea of where the art actually happens. When we are used to go to museums, we are used to see artwork in places that are supposed to print as art, but with those type of interfacing methods, you can put your art in your ways place, a school, or place, home, or into the home, or and the whole principle of museum is kind of like disappearing in a way.
Yeah, of course. There's. I think that there is some kind of idea to translate that notion back into the museum. Really think about the museum space as more as an interface itself, and that's where it kind of affects back on that structure.
Yeah, Anni?
I don't know if I can say it clear enough, but from seeing all the examples, I had like a feeling or a notion of the, let's say, the human interfaces or the human interaction interfaces are kind of or like if you compare it to the computer-generated images where the computer is kind of taking over and there's this computed intelligence, it looked to me that it's kind of aiming towards, let's say, a more traditional image or trying to mimic something human artists would do. And then it seemed to me that the human interaction interfaces were rather kind of distorting that or taking it into much more chaotic or unpredictable places. Is this something? Have you?
Yes.
Is
yes,
there like this kind of a notion where?
Yes, it's yes, and basically the kind of background for that is that the machine is not really a creative, but can only like adapt what it has been seeing, and usually in this case it is already something that is very fixed and very like thematically clear, like face or art, like collection of artworks, which then maybe leads to towards that direction. My idea there was maybe to kind of show that the images themselves are interfaces to other images. But what comes to the kind of more of an works made to be somehow interfacial in that sense, or like human orientated. That's exactly true. And the idea that the clear signal is not necessarily an any like goal to achieve, but rather the distortion of that kind of that signal into something that is unpredictable, or something that is, as you said, somehow maybe more in a creative sense, it's more open.
But is it more kind of related to the sort of natural side of humans, or the human spirit, that once the computer is getting smart enough to create something that we are creating, we are trying to kind of move away from that, or kind of observe it in a different way, or kind of it seems like there's like a twist around, and I don't really have any notion or any kind of clear idea about it, but it's an interesting idea. Is what does it tell us about art or humanity, or how we relate to these kind of art forms that aren't specifically maybe thought of as art, and it's more either kind of anarchistic or chaotic, or kind of contradicting the notion of what is seen as art.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions?
One thing that came to my mind, you were talking about the place on Reddit, and it was pretty interesting social experiment, but it also reminded me of the sort of, I don't know if you could call it, I would call it a piece of art that was not meant to be a piece of art, but a couple of years ago there was on Twitch, which is like a sort of gaming streaming community on the internet, and there was this sort of like experiment, or it started as an experiment, but it went on to be sort of like a movement or something, where someone started playing Pokemon. The first Pokemon, I think it was Pokemon Red, and Twitch chat was controlling the character in the game. So the idea was that they tried to play through the game with like the hive mind of the Twitch chat, and it started with like 10 people in the chat, but at the peak I think there was over 100,000 people controlling the game, so it was pretty chaotic. But it took like, I think it took like 9 or 10 days, but it was pretty great moment when it actually I was one of the guys who was just typing the commands in, and when we played through the game, it was a pretty amazing feeling. But it's interesting, even though it was not thought to be a piece of art, but I think it's sort of the same thing as you were talking here, like interfacing, and it's creating its own story at the same time, because you have the chaos and you have the randomness there. So it's sort of a different thing than just playing through a game, which I think video games are also art, but it creates something more when you have that sort of like interface, and it's sort of random, but at the same time you have the hive mind through the interface of having hundreds of or thousands of people around the world trying to achieve the same goal. Of course, you have to be people who try to stall the progression, and then you have the people who try to progress, and it's interesting how much emotion it can create, and how much it creates a whole culture around it. So I think the same thing happened with the plays. Like there were people who were like, I don't know, they were sitting in front of their computers for 10 hours, 12 hours, 20 hours per day, trying to make the Finnish flag be there all the time, or the moving characters appear above the Finnish flag, or the quote from Star Wars Episode 3 staying in there. And it's really interesting how much emotion those kind of things actually evoke in people. Like it doesn't mean anything if there is the Finnish flag or if there's not the Finnish flag, but still some people are dedicating their whole week or their 3 days or 2 days just to preserve that flag in there. It's pretty interesting phenomenon in like the human interaction also.
And also the fact that the members in their action can be such a huge number, like from hundreds of thousands to millions. Yeah. This is kind of a quite interesting platform to think about further. Yeah.
Okay, I think this is end of discussion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.